Let me be direct with you about something that American commanders are not saying publicly and that the mainstream press is not asking them about because the silence itself is the story. Everyone is focused on the Houthi missile intercepts. Everyone is counting the shots fired, the drones destroyed, the cost per interception, the sortie rates. Every news cycle produces another tactical update. Another SM-2 missile fired, another drone splashed into the Red Sea, another container ship rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 12 days and $300,000 per voyage to global shipping costs. And all of that is real. All of it matters. But none of it is the actual story. The actual story is this. The United States Navy has been conducting sustained combat operations in the Red Sea for the better part of 18 months now. It has expended hundreds of SM-2 and SM-6 missiles, each costing between $2 and $4 million, intercepting Houthi projectiles that cost between $10,000 and $20,000 apiece. It has conducted hundreds of strike missions against Houthi infrastructure in Yemen, and after 18 months of sustained operations by the world's most powerful navy, the Houthi interdiction of Red Sea commercial shipping has not stopped. It has not been significantly degraded. It has, if anything, expanded in geographic reach and sophistication of the weapons employed. That is not a tactical problem. That is a strategic condition. And American commanders are not explaining it because there is no explanation that does not require acknowledging something the official narrative cannot accommodate. I have spent the past several days working through three separate analytical assessments, one produced by the European Council on Foreign Relations, one by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and one circulating in defense policy circles that draws on U.S. Fifth Fleet operational data that has been partially declassified. What they describe collectively is not a battle that is being won slowly. It is a strategic trap. And understanding the geometry of that trap is what I want to walk you through today. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to explain exactly how the trap was set, why the tools the United States deployed were the wrong tools for this specific strategic environment, who is benefiting from the ongoing attrition, and what the three possible exits from this situation look like. Subscribe now because what we are about to cover is being discussed urgently in defense policy circles in Washington and Brussels, and you will not encounter this level of structural analysis in the mainstream coverage. Let us begin with the geography, because the geography is where the trap was designed. The Red Sea is approximately 1,900 kilometers long and between 300 and 355 kilometers wide. Its northern end connects through the Suez Canal to the Mediterranean and onward to European ports. Its southern end passes through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, 30 kilometers wide at its narrowest, and connects to the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. Approximately 12% of global trade transits the Red Sea annually. Before the Houthi campaign began in November 2023, the Red Sea-Suez route carried approximately 40% of Asia to Europe container shipping and significant volumes of energy exports. The Houthi operational area is Yemen's western coast, a roughly 600-kilometer stretch of coastline that provides firing positions covering the entire southern portion of the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb choke point. The weapons employed are launched from mobile platforms, vehicles that can be repositioned in hours, from underground facilities, and from coastal launch sites integrated into civilian infrastructure in ways that make them extraordinarily difficult to strike without civilian casualties that produce immediate political costs. This is not an accident of geography. It is a deliberate defensive architecture developed over years of conflict with the Saudi-led coalition and refined through the observed lessons of conflicts in Ukraine, Gaza, and Lebanon. The United States Navy deployed the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, later rotated with other carrier groups, to conduct what was initially described as a deterrence operation. When deterrence failed to stop the Houthi campaign, the mission evolved into active interdiction, shooting down Houthi missiles and drones before they reached commercial vessels and striking Houthi launch infrastructure in Yemen. 18 months later, the operational picture has not meaningfully changed. The reason for that requires understanding what the Houthi campaign is actually designed to achieve. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing that the official framing, that this is a defensive operation that is succeeding in protecting shipping, does not match the observable facts, which include 12,000-kilometer detour routes that have become the new normal for global container shipping. Now let me tell you what is actually happening. Announcement number 1, the cost asymmetry problem. And this one matters more than the missile intercept numbers because it is the mechanism through which the trap operates. The United States has expended, according to analysis published by the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, somewhere between $1.5 billion and $2 billion in munitions in the Red Sea operations as of early 2026. The SM-2 Standard missile costs approximately $2.1 million per round. The SM-6 costs approximately $4.3 million. The Tomahawk cruise missile, used in strikes against Houthi infrastructure in Yemen, costs approximately $2 million. These weapons are being produced at a rate that is not keeping pace with the rate of expenditure. The United States Navy's stockpile of SM-2 and SM-6 missiles, the primary air defense interceptors, is finite, and the production contracts that have been accelerated in response to this campaign and to the demands of supporting Ukraine will not produce replacement rounds on a timeline that is comfortable given current expenditure rates. The Houthi weapons being intercepted cost between $10,000 for a basic drone and approximately $100,000 for a more sophisticated anti-ship ballistic missile, a weapon type that the Houthis began fielding in 2024, and that represents a more serious threat than the earlier drone campaign. The cost exchange ratio, what America spends to intercept each threat versus what the Houthi movement spends to generate it, ranges from approximately 20 to 1 to 40 to 1 in favor of the Houthi campaign. Sustained at current rates, this exchange ratio represents a form of economic attrition that does not need to sink a single American ship to be strategically effective. It simply needs to continue. This dynamic was explicitly identified in a February 2026 assessment by the Congressional Budget Office, which noted that the Navy's projected munitions procurement budget for fiscal year 2026 and 2027 would not be sufficient to simultaneously maintain Red Sea operational tempo, support Taiwan contingency planning, and rebuild stockpiles expended in support of Ukraine. That is a trilemma. American military planners are managing three competing demands against a finite defense industrial production capacity. The Houthis, by sustaining their Red Sea campaign, are forcing Washington to make resource allocation choices that have consequences in theaters far from Yemen. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two, the infrastructure problem. This is the part that American military commanders are most reluctant to discuss, and with good reason. The United States has conducted, according to U.S. Central Command official statements, hundreds of strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen since January 2024. The targets have included radar installations, launch sites, weapons storage facilities, and command infrastructure. After hundreds of strikes, the Houthi launch rate has not declined to zero. It has not declined by half. It has, in recent months, expanded to include anti-ship ballistic missiles that represent a more sophisticated threat than anything the Houthis fielded at the beginning of the campaign. The reason for this is straightforward, and it applies lessons that should have been learned from decades of counterinsurgency experience. A dispersed, decentralized, politically motivated force operating from within a civilian population that broadly supports its objectives is extraordinarily resistant to attrition through air power alone, particularly when the defending side has had years to develop hardened underground facilities and redundant command structures. The Houthis have governed Yemen's northwest for over a decade. They have spent that decade preparing precisely this kind of resilient infrastructure, observing the targeting patterns of Saudi and Emirati airstrikes, and adapting accordingly. They were not surprised by American targeting doctrine. They were prepared for it. According to reporting by the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies, the most credible independent analytical institution focused on Yemen, Houthi weapons production capacity has not been destroyed by the American strikes. Dispersed underground manufacturing, Iranian technical assistance in rebuilding damaged facilities, and the simple fact that the Houthi weapon system is not a centralized factory but a distributed production network have all contributed to the operational continuity of the campaign despite sustained bombardment. Stay with me because this is where the analysis becomes most uncomfortable and where the silence of American commanders becomes most revealing. Received. That is announcement number two. Announcement number three, who is actually benefiting from 18 months of sustained Red Sea disruption. And this is the one that almost nobody in the mainstream press is connecting correctly. The disruption of Red Sea shipping has increased container shipping costs from Asia to Europe by, according to Drury shipping consultants, approximately 170 to 200% compared to pre-conflict rates. It has generated approximately $300,000 per voyage in additional costs for the Cape of Good Hope detour. It has added 12 to 15 days of transit time to Asia-Europe shipping lanes. These costs are borne by shipping companies, their insurance underwriters, and ultimately by consumers and businesses at the end of the supply chains. They are a dead weight loss for the global economy, except they are not a dead weight loss for everyone. For every shipping route that has been disrupted, there are alternative routes and alternative shippers who benefit from the disruption. Chinese shipping companies operating on routes that are less exposed to Houthi interdiction or operating under informal understandings that the Houthi campaign specifically targets non-Chinese flagged vessels, which the data on interdiction patterns appears to partially support, are capturing market share from Western and South Korean carriers who are absorbing the cost of disruption. According to analysis by the Danish Ship Finance Institute, Chinese state-owned shipping entities increased their market share on Asia-Europe lanes by approximately 8 percentage points during 2024. That is an extraordinary market share gain accomplished without capital investment, without marketing, and without competitive innovation. It was accomplished by geopolitical disruption that their competitors could not avoid, and they could. The quiet beneficiary of 18 months of Red Sea disruption is China, and the quiet question that American strategic planners are not asking loudly enough is whether the Houthi campaign is being sustained, equipped, and supplied in a manner that makes that outcome intentional rather than coincidental. Now let us talk about what is really happening behind the official silence, because the official silence is itself informative. American commanders are not explaining how 18 months of sustained naval operations have failed to stop the Houthi campaign, because explaining it honestly would require acknowledging several things simultaneously. First, that the tool deployed, a carrier strike group optimized for deterrence and conventional naval warfare, is not the right instrument for the specific problem being faced. Second, that the cost exchange ratio is unsustainable at current rates over extended timelines. Third, that the infrastructure resilience of the Houthi system has exceeded American targeting intelligence assessments. And fourth, that there is no military-only solution to the strategic problem, because the political conditions in Yemen that sustain the Houthi movement cannot be altered through air power. This is not a failure of American military execution. The Navy has done what the Navy can do with the tools and authorities it has been given. It is a failure of strategic theory, a deployment of kinetic military power against a problem that kinetic military power was not designed to solve. This pattern has one of the clearest historical precedents in recent memory. Consider the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The Soviet army entered Afghanistan in 1979 with overwhelming conventional superiority. Armored formations, helicopter gunships, artillery, an air force against an adversary with none of these. Within 3 years, the strategic logic had produced a situation that Soviet commanders recognized internally but could not publicly describe accurately. Their military capabilities were being applied against a problem, a geographically distributed, ideologically motivated, externally supported insurgency, for which their military capabilities were structurally mismatched. The weapons were effective. The strategy was wrong. The Soviet Union spent 9 years and approximately 50,000 dead soldiers learning this lesson. The Red Sea situation is different in scale and character, but the underlying structural dynamic, the right military applied to the wrong strategic problem, is identical. So where does this leave us? 3 paths. Path 1. Diplomatic resolution through Yemen peace process. The Houthi campaign ends not through military defeat but through a negotiated settlement in Yemen's civil war that gives the Houthi movement sufficient political recognition and security guarantees that continuing the Red Sea campaign no longer serves its strategic interests. This path requires engaging the Houthi movement as a political actor with legitimate grievances, a recognition that Washington has resisted. It also requires Omani and Chinese mediation, both of which have the channels and relationships to make it possible. I assess this as the most likely path to actually ending the campaign, and the least likely path to be publicly acknowledged as the American strategy because of the domestic political cost of describing it accurately. Path 2. Sustain degraded status quo. The Red Sea remains disrupted at levels that are economically painful but manageable. Shipping companies adapt to the Cape of Good Hope route as a semi-permanent alternative. Insurance premiums stabilize at elevated levels. The American naval presence continues. The Houthis continue. Global trade absorbs the cost. This path is economically wasteful and strategically unsatisfying, but it is the path of least political resistance because it requires no public acknowledgement of failure and no politically costly concessions. Path 3. Escalation. A decision is made to fundamentally escalate the military campaign against Houthi infrastructure, not the current strike tempo, but a sustained intensive air campaign designed to eliminate Houthi military capacity more comprehensively. This path carries significant risks: civilian casualties at a scale that produces regional and international political costs, the possibility of Iranian direct involvement if the campaign threatens Houthi survival, and the strategic question of what comes after even a successful military campaign in a country that has no functioning central government and a humanitarian situation that is already catastrophic. I think we are on path 2. With periodic domestic political pressure producing impulses toward Path 3 that are not sustained long enough to change the strategic situation. Path 1 remains available and unacknowledged. Tell me in the comments what you think American commanders should be saying publicly that they are not saying. Tell me whether you think the Red Sea situation represents a strategic trap from which there is a clean exit or a chronic condition that the global economy will simply absorb. We will keep tracking every development in the Red Sea, the Houthi campaign, and the broader question of what sustained naval attrition against an asymmetric adversary actually costs. That is what this channel does. Subscribe now. Share this with everyone trying to understand the Red Sea story beneath the Daily Intercept counts. Turn on notifications